We revisit this reality every year. Mary's situation was dire. The word virgin here really just means a child assigned female at birth. She is a child. She is a child whose virginity is essential to her family's honor, to her honor, and possibly to her survival. And now she is a pregnant child. Mary's world comes crashing down with the conception of the Christ child. And that's just her personal world. Her people were occupied by Rome. At this time, Rome was the most violent and uncaring empire in the world. Rome was taxing the people, which meant they were building their war machine. As much as I want our taxes to go up so we can provide health care and better schooling and mass transit and housing for homeless siblings and a plan to become ecologically sustainable, that is not how taxes worked in Rome. Taxes were for war. On Christmas, we read that Rome unleashed a new taxation scheme. Rome was building its war machine on the backs of its already oppressed people. This is all a digression to say that while Mary's personal world was grim, her socio-political world was worse. Birth rates have dropped this year. Now, any parent with small children at home, like me, like their kids are at home, always at home, always at home, any of us could tell you that there's not going to be a quarantine baby boom coming. Maybe a few first kids, but people who already have kids, nah, it's going to be a baby bust. And there are other very real reasons not to have children right now. When things in the world look grim or difficult, or when it's an uphill journey to climate sustainability, it makes sense for parents to say, no, not right now. Mary is a vulnerable child in a scary place personally and a terrifying place sociopolitically. And now a whole new helpless person is going to be stuck in all of this. I've wondered if Mary ended up being Jesus' mother, not by some divine plan, but because the angel started with Susie down the street and she said, "You think you are bringing that baby now in my unwed child body? We wouldn't survive. You must be out of your mind. Angel, messenger of heaven, you need to take this message to heaven." Absolutely not. And then maybe the angel visited Clara a few blocks over and she just couldn't stop going back and forth between crying and screaming. So the angel just said, never mind, can you just point me in the direction of Mary's house? All the parents of the neighborhood, they wondered what was up with all of these suddenly traumatized young teens. It's shocking, really, that Mary said yes. It's shocking that she not only said yes, but that she wrote a beautiful song of liberating love and justice. Where did she find this hope? How could a person in this situation sing of such hope? Directly before writing this sermon, news came out of a pervasive sea foam in Australia full of snakes. Hidden in sea foam, literally a cloud of snakes sneaking up on you. And my immediate response was, there is absolutely no hope for 2020 because of a cloud of snakes. And Mary is facing so much more than a cloud of snakes on the other side of the world, and yet she sings of hope. But Mary had a gift within her. She had the hopes of Sarah, who was old and barren and birthed an entire nation and culture. She had the hopes and stories of an enslaved community that miraculously found liberation from Egypt. She had the hopes of Rahab, a marginalized woman who saw hope, believed, and weaved herself into the story that eventually leads to Mary and Jesus. She had the hopes of Tamar, who lost husband after husband with no children to comfort and provide for her, but who made good on her life. She had the hopes of Ruth, a foreign, impoverished widow who became great-grandmother to King David. She had the hopes of David, who was no one, and then was banished, but then became king. She had the hopes of the prophets who said again and again and again that if their hearts would return to the just ways of the Holy One, Mary's people would be restored. And she had the hopes of her cousin, The song comes immediately following Mary's older cousin, an old woman well past childbearing years in a society where childbearing is the full worth of any woman who was pregnant. When Mary's cousin sees Mary's desperate situation, she doesn't see a problem to solve or the ruin of Mary's scant fortunes. She sees hope. She speaks hope, and it's so contagious that as soon as Elizabeth's droplets of hope hit Mary's weary ears, she sings, "My soul magnifies the Eternal One, and my spirit rejoices in God, my liberator." Mary had millennia of hope to borrow, and the very present hope of her cousin. And all that shared story and hope piled up so that if her heart grew faint, she could simply rest on the hope, on the support of a hopeful story after hopeful story after hopeful story, and on the hand of her hopeful sister. This time of year, we talk about hope, and this year, Kathy Escobar invites us to face that sometimes hope isn't easy. She invites us to borrow hope. In her book, which I do recommend reading, she tells the very real story of a friend in a hard place saying, "Can I borrow your hope? I've lost mine." When I read these words, I felt them in my bones. I have been there. Oh, have I been there? Friends, there is a wealth of hope we can borrow. We have the hope of the liberated Hebrew people. We have the hope of Sarah and Abram, the hope of Rahab, the hope of Tamar, the hope of Ruth, the hope of Elizabeth, and the hope of Mary. We have Mary's song. More than that, we have the hopes of Harriet Tubman and Lucretia Mott, of Rosa Parks. We have the hopes of Ruby Bridges, the hopes of Greta Thunberg, the hopes of Representative Deb Haaland of the Pueblo people, the hopes of Elliot Page, who simply let us know his/their name and pronouns and was welcomed. The hopes of Patsy Mink, Gloria Anzaldúa, Malala Yousafzai. Like a sea foam cloud filled with snakes, we are surrounded by hope upon hope upon hope that we can borrow. The Hebrew scriptures tell us in Hebrews 12:1, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out before us." These names that I mentioned are big, historic names that we can borrow hope from. But we can also borrow hope from each other. When I was pastoring in Sacramento, I went through a season of depression and some hopelessness about my own future. I asked my church at this time to do this activity where we wrote down a hope we didn't think we could actually hold hope for, a hope that we couldn't hold. And we gave it to someone else to hold for us, to pray over, to gently tend, to hold hope for us when we couldn't hold hope for ourselves, to lend us their hope. I didn't intend to participate in this activity, not wanting to, put my hopelessness as a pastor on anyone who called me pastor. But a friend in the community urged me to. So I wrote down on one piece of paper, one piece of my hopeless pie, and I gave it to her. She held on to it, unknown to me, for 5 years. I had written on that paper that someday I would get to be a mom. She sent it back to me in the days after sharing that my firstborn had a difficult diagnosis. It was a moment where I needed to be reminded of hope and that others can lend me their hope or hold hope for me when I feel faint. So, church, today I invite us to become a little free hope library. Leave some hope, take some hope. Consider writing down something you don't feel able to hope for and give it to a friend, maybe a member of our community, or feel free to mail it to me at the church. Let us lend our hope and hold one another's hopes. And all these collected hopes, they pile up, and when we feel faint, we can lean into them, as Mary leaned into so many stories and people of hope. That in a moment where anyone would feel faint, she sang us a song we can still sing, a song that has become the hope that we borrow this very day. So let us share hope. Let us borrow hope. Let us hold hope, and let us sing. Amen.